Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer on the Boardroom audit for ISO 14001-2026. Today, we're walking straight into the executive suite for a pretty high-stakes showdown. On one side of the table, you've got a seasoned ISO lead auditor. On the other, a senior executive. And right off the bat, I want to clarify, this isn't your typical, routine check of dusty compliance binders down in a factory basement. Oh no. This is a rigorous, magnifying glass examination of the corporate checkbook itself. We're going to look at exactly how the 2026 standard permanently links environmental risks directly to capital investments. Okay, let's dive right into this. Just be honest with yourself for a second here. Does your corporate strategy actually protect the environment, or is it kind of just a symbolic gesture? Because for years, let's face it, organizations would frame these beautiful, glossy green policies on the wall, while their actual day-to-day business decisions told a completely different story. It was this totally disconnected silo. We'd, dust off a binder once a year for the audit and then get right back to business as usual. But under the 2026 revision, that symbolic approach is a one-way ticket to a major nonconformity.
And that brings us to Clause 5.1, which is a real game changer here. It establishes the absolute requirement that environmental management has to be embedded into your strategic direction and core business processes. Meaning, it forces environmental considerations out of the basement and straight into the executive boardroom. Top management is now strictly, and I mean strictly, accountable for ensuring these priorities actually influence everything from how a product is designed right down to how the financial planning is mapped out. So, let's set the scene for this interview. The lead auditor doesn't walk in and ask to see a recycling policy. No way. Instead, they lean across that giant mahogany table with a highly targeted demand. Show me how your environmental risks dictate your capital investment decisions, right? They want financial proof. They want to see if things like climate change, resource scarcity, and regulatory shifts actually move the needle when the company is deciding to spend millions of dollars. Now, a good senior executive doesn't even flinch at this. They reply confidently, environmental risks are enterprise risks. They are evaluated in every major CapEx approval using life cycle cost analysis. And boom, that proves exactly what ISO 14001-2026 demands. Notice how they aren't just looking at the initial sticker price of a new manufacturing plant. Instead, they're factoring in the long-term environmental operating costs, stuff like emissions, waste disposal, water usage, over the asset's entire life cycle. Stepping back for a second, this kind of executive behavior is actually mandated by specific leadership requirements found in Clause 5.1. Top management literally has to align the environmental policy with the corporate strategy. They have to weave the environmental management system into core processes like procurement, rely on life cycle costs for making investments, and set targets that are actually measurable. Without hard evidence of these integrated actions, well, an auditor is going to quickly raise a systemic nonconformance. It's a massive paradigm shift, really. Just look at the contrast. The old way treated environmental management as this disconnected compliance silo, basically just a frustrating cost center that only existed to keep the company from getting fined. But the ISO 14001-2026 way? It demands deep integration. It shifts the entire organization from just playing reactive defense to building a proactive strategy. It turns environmental management into a true driver of innovation and long-term resilience. Moving along in the audit, the auditor decides to push the boundaries. Literally, they ask, if you're expanding production, how do you ensure the EMS scope and risks aren't left behind? Now, this question specifically targets Clause 4.3 on the scope of the EMS and Clause 6.3 on the management of change. Basically, the auditor wants to make sure the company isn't artificially limiting its responsibility to older, safer facilities, while conveniently ignoring the environmental impacts of a massive new expansion project. And the executive comes right back with, we evaluate water scarcity and emission risks before expansion. It fundamentally changes what technologies we buy. Now that is deep strategic integration in action. Environmental realities are actively shaping their physical expansion strategy. If they're planning to build in a water-scarce region, they don't just build blindly and pay the fines later. No, the risk assessment forces them to invest upfront in advanced water recycling systems. So, how do we actually get from abstract theory to a signed check? Well, it's basically a three-step journey. First up, you identify the environmental risks. That's your analytical foundation under Clause 6.1. Second, you make sure leadership embeds this risk directly into the corporate vision under Clause 5.1. And finally, step 3, you approve the capital expenditure. The risk evaluation directly dictates the financial allocation. It creates this seamless, perfectly documented flow from hazard identification straight to the boardroom checkbook. And when life cycle cost analysis is actively used like this, you see a massive shift in the corporate budget. Take a look at this. On an executive dashboard, you might suddenly see 45% of capital expenditure allocated to sustainable, energy-efficient technology, completely outpacing the traditional tech. This isn't just a win for the environment, it is a calculated, strategic, financial move to permanently reduce long-term operational costs and minimize enterprise risk.
But, the auditor decides to throw a curveball to test the true depth of this commitment. They ask, what happens if a high-emission project promises higher short-term financial returns? And honestly, this is the ultimate realistic business dilemma, right? Because it's really easy to be green when it's cheap, but when environmental objectives clash head-on with quick profitability, does the environmental policy become just a mere guideline, or is it an enforceable rule? The executive delivers an absolute mic-drop answer. They say, it gets rejected. Our environmental policy is tied directly to our executive performance evaluations. Wow, that is what genuine leadership accountability looks like under the new standard. The executive's own bonuses and performance scorecards are inextricably linked to hitting targets like carbon reduction and water efficiency. If they try to chase a quick buck with a high-emission project, well, their own wallet suffers. This beautifully summarizes the structural integration required here. Corporate governance now means that environmental metrics actually live inside executive scorecards and shared risk registers right alongside your traditional financial risks. It means life cycle criteria are fully mandated for suppliers, but most importantly, accountability is distributed cross-functionally across procurement, engineering, and logistics. It is not just dumped on the desk of a lone environmental manager anymore. Honestly, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, please remember this simple truth. It is about the corporate checkbook, not just the rule book. True compliance with ISO 14001:2026 isn't proven by some beautifully written manual sitting on a shelf. It's proven by where an organization actually spends its money. If your capital expenditure doesn't reflect your environmental commitments, your management system is pretty much an illusion. Returning to our boardroom scenario, the lead auditor finally closes their notebook. Having seen the financial planning, the shared risk registers, the CapEx approvals, and the executive scorecards, they deliver their verdict. Audit complete. Your environmental management system is truly integrated into your business strategy. The organization proved conformity not through some basement paperwork, but through real, integrated, strategic financial action. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder today. Look critically at your own organization for a minute. If an auditor walked right into your boardroom and opened up your company's checkbook today, what would they find? A strategic, fully integrated environmental vision, or just a list of expenses? How you answer that is going to tell you exactly how prepared you are for the future of environmental management. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.